You're born from a woman, and she starts out as your mother, and you would think that you would love your mother no matter what. I love the idea of having a mother, but I don't love her as my mother. And when I see her, I can't help but feel hatred and rage. A lot of people have asked me, have I ever thought about going to visit her? And I usually give the same response. I never want to see her again.
Evil exists in this world. What it looks like is right there in the purple shirt. Evil on this earth. Evil incarnate. If you've never looked at it, look into those eyes, because there evil sits.
I can't help but agree with her. This was a planned and executed murder of someone. To do something like that, it takes an evil and vile person, and she deserves whatever's gonna happen to her.
This picture, kind of a family picture, which is really our only picture of all of us together as a family. Others may look at it and think, what a happy family. But to me, when I look at it, I can't think of it as a happy picture, because I remember so vividly what led up to it. For me, it's a complete fake smile. It presents a false idea of what the reality of it was. Kimberly and I met through a mutual friend who set us up on a blind date. Went to a movie, which was I Married an Axe Murderer, which I'm not making that up. We had that first date and we really hit it off. You know, she was really charming and beautiful and very kind and understanding. She really valued being a mother, which I had a young child at the time, and so I really valued that. She was just recently divorced. I was recently divorced. We seemed to have a lot in common at that time. The earliest that I really started seeing signs that there was some kind of imbalance there was, we had been dating for a couple of weeks, and she invited me to her divorce support group at her church. And I showed up early, and she was running late.
First time here?
Yeah, my friend Kim, she's a regular. So
Okay.
here to support her.
Thanks.
So I went on in to the meeting, and she came in and kind of made a point of sitting on the other side of the room from me. And I didn't know what was, going on, because she had invited me to this thing. So afterwards, she was acting very kind of mad at me, and I didn't really understand why.
What are you doing? You told me to come. I should have waited for you, I guess.
And she said, "How dare you go into the meeting without me? I invited you to this. You needed to wait for me outside." And this seems like such a small thing, but her change of mood was so quick for something so small, and it kind of left me puzzled as to what was going on with her.
I was just trying to help you.
I don't care what you were trying to do. This is my thing.
I was trying to respond like a normal person would respond. Well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that.
Thank you for being so understanding.
And then suddenly she gets very romantic and passionate, just completely distracts and kind of makes you forget what just happened. My thought wasn't, wow, something's wrong, I need to get away from this person. It was more like, wow, she really likes me, you know? Kimberly always had her own agenda, and it was her way or the highway.
What did I tell you about this?
I don't remember you saying anything.
I needed to have my gallbladder removed. So I had surgery to have it removed and then went home, and I was heavily medicated and laying on the couch.
This is unbelievable. You can't even follow the simplest of instructions.
And Kimberly got really mad at me because I had put some of my daughter's diapers in a diaper pail that she had said she was saving for something else. And so she just really completely just exploded, was screaming at me.
Next time, listen.
That night, suddenly I was out of medication. There were a couple of times during that time period where I would go to look for my medication and all of a sudden there's just one. Or maybe even I might go and it's completely gone. The bottle's there, but they're all empty, where I swore that, I had more. I never really thought of her as the kind of person who would do that to deliberately make me suffer. But I kind of always assumed that, Kimberly took them. And I know this sounds really kind of pathetic, but I had tried to break up with her on a number of different occasions, but I always allowed myself to get kind of talked back into the relationship. But ultimately, I had finally resolved that I was going to break up with her, and she told me that night that
I'm pregnant.
And she had told me outright that she could not have more children. She had her first child, she said, through a high-risk pregnancy, and her doctor had told her that she was not able to have another child.
I thought you said this was impossible.
I guess it's our little miracle baby.
There is no doubt in my mind that she did that deliberately, and that she knew that she could get pregnant, and that she deliberately got pregnant.
All I'm saying is that we can do this as a team without being a couple.
And so we were having an argument, and I had just said, I'm out. I can't do this.
You are just pathetic.
I'll be there for you through the pregnancy, but I can't marry you. We can't be together. But, I can still be part of the child's life.
You're just gonna ditch out on your obligations?
And she said, no, absolutely not. If you want to be part of this baby's life, we're going to be married. The idea of having a child out in the world and not being a part of his life was just unthinkable for me.
What, you want to get married?
So we decided to get married.
I think that's our best option, sweetheart.
And frankly, the wedding for me was not a happy occasion. I remember really clearly right before just going out behind the house and just kind of having a good crying session, that knowing that this is not gonna last. This is Kimberly holding Jamie, in his first hours of life. And I think what this represents to me at the time was just some hope that things could be better than what they were. When Jamie is an adult, I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror and say that I had given everything that I have to give. She threw the hammer, and it kind of whizzed by my head. She was trying to kill me. I remember I had come home late from work. It was really late. I was exhausted. One of Kimberly's favorite things was just as I was about to fall asleep, she wants to start talking.
Hey, did you fix the garbage disposal like I asked?
About, not really pleasant things about maybe problems we'd had or whatever. We started arguing about it.
So what, we're just supposed to let the dishes pile up and live in a trash heap?
Eventually, I just had enough, and I got up. She was in full-on rage.
Don't you walk away from me when I am talking to you!
She just kind of looks like a wild woman and is screaming pretty much at the top of her voice. I don't know where she got the hammer from, but she took the hammer and she just flung it right at me. And I dodged, but it just happened to just stick right into the wall. I've never really been in a situation where I felt like someone was trying to kill me. And honestly, I don't know whether she had murder on her mind at that point, but it felt like it. And I took a picture of it to have absolute proof that that is, in fact, going on. The hammer in the wall is right about eye level in the wall. We both did leave it in the wall for at least a couple of days. And for me, it was almost symbolic, like I was gonna leave it there for her to see what she did. But she didn't do anything. She just left it there. It's hard to say whether I really, really knew her. The potential was there all along that she could murder someone. When I first got custody of Jamie, I had this idea that the nightmare's over, But there was an incident that happened at my house wherein Jamie and I got in kind of a scuffle.
He was watching a TV show, and I stood up front of the TV and I said,
I don't want to watch this.
and he said, no, you need to move.
If you change the channel, I'll move.
I'm not changing anything. We're watching this.
And I said, no, I'm not gonna move. He is like, okay, well, I will move you.
What did I say? Jamie, get out of the way.
So he moved me and I started pushing him. Locking arms and kind of tug-warring against each other. I had fallen and hit my head on a corner of a TV stand. So I called my mom. My mother was a master manipulator. My mom decided to talk to a lawyer the next day and have me write down what had happened word for word on an affidavit. And a lot of the things that happened, she was telling me to write down as I was writing it.
It says, last night on November 11th at 8:45 p.m., my dad and I were watching TV. We disagreed on a show. I stood in front of the TV. My dad got angry and picked me up by my shirt and body slammed me down to the floor. True, he stood in front of the TV. True, we disagreed on a show. Then, saying, pick me up by my shirt and body slam me down to the floor, that part was not true at all. The way she manipulates is she will take a small grain of truth about something that happened and then frame it in such a way that suits her agenda, that makes her look good. The judge immediately took him out of my custody and gave him back to Kimberly.
My relationship with my mom was very weird.
Jamie, come have a seat.
One moment she's saying, come sit on my lap and watch TV with me.
How's school been going?
Good.
Yeah.
And then let's say I get a stain on my shirt.
What is this?
The entire mood would change. She would just flip the script super quick. And, she would start yelling at me.
What, are you a slob or something?
And call me horrible names. And I would say back, I hate you. I never want to see you again.
I hate it here. I want to live with Dad.
Oh, you want to live with your father?
Fine.
And so I got out of the house.
Mom.
She locked the door. And I was in some athletic shorts and a t-shirt, and it was freezing cold. I don't even know how long I was out there. I probably was out there for hours. But I remember calling my dad and saying, hey, please come get me, please come get me.
Hey, Daddy, it's me. I'm outside my house. I'm scared. Could you just please call back this number? It's Jamie. Bye.
A lot of the time when I would call him and say, please come get me, he would say, well, I can't, because that would be violating the court order.
If I go against, the agreement, then it will make it even harder for him to ever come live with me. There were even times when I had called the police department and talked to them, and they said, well, this is not a criminal matter. There's nothing we can do. That's the cruel irony of it, is that he has to be obviously injured, badly injured, in order for me to take some kind of action. And by then, it's kind of too late.
I remember it was picture day at school. So she, makes me put on a colored shirt, makes me wear nice shorts, make sure my shoes are white. Or my mom would part my hair down the middle and use, half a bottle of hairspray. And, that was kind of a dorky haircut. When I get to the school, I just hated wearing that hair so much, just wanted to mess it all up.
Did you get the pictures?
She paid about $40 for the brand new school pictures, all different sizes. They ended up coming in and my hair was messed up and she lost her mind.
This is an embarrassment.
How could you do that? You're a stupid moron, stuff like that. And eventually it got to the point where she started pinning me up against the wall and smacked me like 30, 40 times as hard as she could.
No, I paid for these. What is wrong with you? Do you think that this is funny? Do you like looking like a slob?
I was never punched in the eyes or the face. I was always punched like in the ribs or the stomach or the arms because, my mom would make sure that people didn't know what was going on behind the scenes.
And now you know what happens when you don't do what I tell you.
One thing that I really regret is not saying anything to my dad. He didn't really know about all the stuff that was happening because I never really tell anybody. I just kind of kept it a secret for many, many years.
Over the years, he would come to my house when I would ask him about a bruise or an injury or whatever, and he would say, yeah, you know, I was wrestling with my brothers or whatever. And he was a pretty rambunctious kid, so it was really hard to know what, if any, bruises were attributed directly to Kimberly's treatment of him.
I did my mom's laundry and my brother's laundry, and I cleaned the kitchen and cooked dinner sometimes. And, you know, it's a lot to do. And if those things didn't get done, she would get really angry. I was doing laundry.
Did you fold your clothes?
And I put my clothes in the drawer. And I just crammed them in there. I didn't fold them at all. And she always wanted me to fold the clothes perfect.
Nope. Exactly what I thought. Stand up. Stand up.
I remember her yelling and screaming at me.
And all of these. You're gonna do it over again. Do you understand me?
She was gonna lock me in the room. When you have a lock on a door in a room, that's usually on the inside of the room. But what she did is she unscrewed the doorknob and switched the lock to the outside of the room. So I couldn't get out. And she kept me in that room for hours. It was past dinner time. I would say, hey, I really have to go to the bathroom. And she would make me wait. I had finally decided that, you know, I couldn't hold it anymore, so I kicked out the screen guarding the window, and I just decided I was gonna pee out of the window. That's not normal at all, but I thought that that's how you got grounded as a kid. Things were not good between my mom and I. I was trying to play video games to pass the time. That Xbox was the only thing that could keep my mind off of being stuck in that house. And my mother was getting on my case about playing too many video games.
What's your problem?
My problem? My problem is that you're standing around all day.
Whatever.
And she unplugged it. And I just got super angry, like more angry than I probably have ever been. And I took the Xbox and I threw it outside of the window. And that's when things escalated. She took the cord of the Xbox and like wrapped it around my neck and started to pull back. It was just blind rage. All you can do is just feel scared and helpless, and that you hope the person behind you doing that to you will stop. Zach got up and said, please stop choking him, please stop choking him, because he saw that I was starting to grasp for air. 5 seconds more, gonna pass out or die maybe. She stopped, and I think I was able to get my phone after that and called the police and got the police involved. I was under the impression that cops are there to help you.
I'm so sorry, officers. I don't know what to do. He's out of control.
She's lying.
Quiet, okay? We'll get to you in a sec.
But when you have a parent like mine who can, you know, weave in and out of words and mess with people's heads and manipulate people, you know, I can't really blame the cops for being manipulated by my mom.
And that's when he just lost it. He just lost it.
And then what happened? Did he hit you or anything?
She would make sure that she was crying to make sure that she looked like she was the victim in that situation. And she said I was pushing her against the wall, and I was on top of her at one point on the ground. I was made out to be the sole bad guy in this situation. My mom was made out to be as a mom struggling against a disobedient child. The big thing about it was that she would have my brother involved. So it was 2 against 1 in that situation.
Zach, baby, you know what a monster your brother is, right?
My mom had basically told my brother to lie.
Sometimes he can be quite angry.
Zach, just like I did, faced a lot of abuse. I just remember seeing a confused little kid tearing his heart in half between helping his brother and staying loyal to his mom, and he felt that he had to follow with what she was saying.
Whenever they get into fights, he kind of loses control of himself.
And that's what Zach told the police. I don't blame him for that. I don't blame him for that at all, but I definitely blame my mom for manipulating the situation to her advantage. Ended up, I got a citation, I believe, for an assault, but they ended up dismissing that. When I went back, she said, if you ever tell anybody, if you tell your dad, if you tell your teachers at school, if you tell your counselors, if you tell anybody, I will kill you. She wanted this picture to look normal. It may look like we're happy, but I definitely wasn't feeling that way on the inside. All I can see is the mother that I was trying to get away from. No matter how happy we look, that's all I see. I had gotten in trouble at school. I got called into the principal's office. And I remember I was just freaking out because they had to call my mom. All I knew is I didn't want to go home because I knew what was going to happen. So I ran away after school. I just went to this grocery store and tried to hide in the very back of the grocery store. And I stayed there until about 8 or 9 o'clock. All I wanted to do was just hide out, was just try to stay away from any harm that would come my way when I go home. Maybe somebody would help me. Maybe they'd see me back there and help me.
What's going on?
I ended up getting caught back there by a store manager.
You okay?
I remember trying to tell him that I'm scared to go home. Let me stay here for the night.
What's going on at home?
I don't feel safe anymore. She's crazy.
I think we need to call the cops and let them help you out.
No, please don't do that.
No, all I knew is I didn't want to go home because I knew what was going to happen.
I promise. They're gonna help you out.
He felt like he needed to call the police. And eventually, maybe 20 minutes later, 25 minutes later, I think the police finally came. And the police took me home after that. I think I ran away from home maybe 5 or 6 times. Each time the cops looked for me. They said, if you run away anymore from home, you're gonna get put in juvie. And I always felt like it was another stab in the back from the cops. My dad didn't know the real reasons why I ran away. He only knew what I was telling him. I remember the feeling of being stuck. That was the biggest feeling of them all, was, feeling like you're in a hole that you can't get out of. And I felt that no matter what I did, nobody was gonna help me.
She moved a lot. She moved around a lot. I mean, like probably 6 or 8 times in a year's time. And I would kind of track that. I still had to go and pick Jamie up for a visitation, so I pretty much saw every place that she lived.
So I'm not 100% sure why we moved around a lot. When we would pack those bags and we'd pack our boxes, we were trying to get out of there as fast as possible.
I think it's very possible that the reason she would kind of bounce from place to place was that the longer she was at one place, the more she would start to kind of expose what her MO with her children and just with her life in general. But I think that the idea that people began to understand her and kind of catch on the longer she stayed.
I was in my mom's room when I wasn't supposed to be. I was playing in her room.
What the hell are you doing?
She doesn't like it when anybody goes into her room.
I told you a million times, right?
She pushed me. She got to the point of uncontrollable rage. And she was banging my head against the hardwood floor. And I turned over and she started choking me with her hands. My vision started to go just ever so slightly black. I remember feeling that my mom was killing me, basically. It's a hard thing to describe, your mother hurting you in the worst way possible. At that point, I had tried to fight back. Thank God she let go. I'd finally had enough, and I ran out of the house, contacted my dad, and he took pictures. And I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
This might be one of the most important pictures I've ever taken in my life. This incident, as horrific as it was, really enabled me to take actual action. Now I have something. I have something that I can pull you out of that.
The main reason I never told you, all the years of abuse and stuff like that is I just felt that if, I told you, somehow my mom would find out. She had threatened me that if I told anybody that I would die. And that's why I was just so scared all those years to really let you know what was happening.
And for me, that feeling of guilt, is pretty heavy. Something I still feel a lot today.
I can't blame you for any of that.
I mean, I can tell you with 100% honesty that I did everything that I could possibly do.
And I believe you with all my heart, I really do.
Jamie, honey, I need you to pack your things.
My grandmother told me we need to go as soon as possible and that she'll tell me later what's going on.
Is it my mom?
I know it has something to do with my mom. I know she did something. I felt this horrible sense of anxiety. Like, I remember just feeling worried and that Luke wasn't really safe.
Leave it. We can go. Let's go.
When I found out that she was suspected in a murder case, it was almost as if I knew it was always going to happen. I was visiting my mom every other weekend to see how Luke was doing, and I would try to go in there and play with him and make sure he was okay. I remember just feeling worried, but I was also trying to finally live a normal life with my dad as well. When my mother found Cherry as a babysitter for my younger brother, Luke, I remember there was a lot of custody battles between my brother's dads and my mother. She had lost me, she had lost Zach, and now she was losing Luke, her last son. Cherry Walker was a really, really genuine, nice, good person. She really adored and loved Luke a lot.
It's a picture of Cherry Walker. She was a lovely person. She was kind of a pure soul in so many ways. I can't help but to look at her as kind of a martyr for us, a symbol of the hideousness of what Kimberly did. I remember it so clearly. My phone buzzed, and I looked down, and it was Kimberly's mother. And she said, do you know Cherry Walker? Her body was found burned out in the country. Literally, my first words were just, no. I mean, it was kind of mind-numbing almost. It was so surreal. Kimberly was the #1 suspect from the very minute they discovered who Cherry was.
If you were the captain, what would be your name?
There was a CPS hearing, and Cherry was subpoenaed. So once that happened, I think Kimberly just became desperate.
How fast is Mach 2?
1,000.
And so in order to prevent her from testifying, Kimberly, killed her.
Yeah?
Kimberly's version of the events was that she picked up Cherry Walker to have dinner to talk to her about her testimony in the upcoming CPS trial, that Cherry had a seizure and that she stopped breathing and then went driving around for a while to try and figure out what to do. She decides that she needs to take her out in the country, took some lighter fluid out of the back of her car, squirted it all over her body, and lit her on fire. When Kimberly's mother called me and told me about this, Jamie was actually with her. And part of the reason that she called me was that they were basically leaving town. The DA had arranged for them to stay in a hotel, kind of a protected place that, Kimberly wouldn't know, just in case there were any kind of threat. It's just been really, really difficult to get my head around the idea that Kimberly would actually deliberately and premeditatively do that, take someone's life.
The first time I'd seen my mom since the news, and the last time I've seen my mom at all, was when I took the stand. They make you stand up, say your name, point, and say, "I recognize Kimberly Diane Cargill." I saw a woman who was broken beyond repair. I remember her eyes were like steel, like just cold, lifeless. That's all I could see was the eyes of a murderer.
In their closing arguments, the state prosecutors told the jury that Cargill was a liar, a killer, and a monstrous child abuser. They then urged the jury to sentence the death penalty when deciding her fate.
I didn't realize how much of an impact my testimony would mean. And I felt really bad because I wouldn't want anybody to die because of me. But I just felt like justice had been served. That finally, all the years and years of abuse, all the times I'd call the police, all the times that she had hit me or my brothers, I felt like all of that finally came to an end. I got in fights at school, I got in fights with my dad. I acted out. I didn't want to go to counseling, I didn't want to go to therapy. I used heroin just to numb it. And eventually I decided that I need to turn my life around or I'm gonna end up just like my mother. I decided to go to rehab, and I've worked really hard to, build a career for myself. I've gone to culinary school and graduated with honors. When I learned I was going to be a father, I looked forward to having a baby. I'm going to make sure he has all the things that I didn't have. I know with all my heart that he'll be loved and he'll be cared for. And for the rest of his life, he'll love his parents and he'll know that they treated him properly and good and loved him.
This is a picture of Kimberly when she's in prison. I feel like I don't know this person. I think of her as Kimberly the murderer, not so much Kimberly the mother of my child.
People ask me, do you want to see your mother again? And I almost always give the same response, and I just have no interest. I just want to move on with my life and try to forget that it ever happened. It's a chapter of my life that I'm planning on closing. My mother.
The night Claire Donnelly vanished, the Texas heat felt wrong. Thick, breathless, heavy in a way it never had before. People still talk about that heat, as if the air itself had sensed what was coming, as if the darkness hovering over the cul-de-sac had tightened just enough to warn anyone who paid attention. But no one did. The world turned as usual. Ceiling fans hummed through open windows, porch lights buzzed against clouds of insects, and somewhere beyond the quiet houses a distant train wailed across flat land. Nothing unusual. Nothing loud enough to become a headline. Not yet. Claire's house sat third from the corner, a single-story place with pale shutters and a porch too small for anything but one chair. Most evenings she graded papers there with a glass of iced tea sweating beside her. Neighbors would wave as they walked by, and she would smile, warm and distracted, a teacher's smile, the kind that belonged to someone who believed the world was mostly good. That night, though, her porch light flickered. A detail that seemed trivial at the time but later felt like a message blinking in the dark, a warning no one decoded. Inside, everything looked painfully ordinary. A stack of homework waiting on the coffee table. A lesson plan with notes scribbled in the margins. A cardigan draped over the back of a dining chair. Nothing broken. Nothing misplaced. Nothing that suggested she had run, fought, or even hesitated. Her bathtub was still warm when police checked it. The kettle clicked on the stove as if she had forgotten to switch it off. Her car keys sat in their usual bowl, neatly, dutifully. That was the first thing that bothered officers, the calmness, the routine, the absolute lack of disruption. Because disappearances usually leave a trail, even a faint one. But here, the world had simply swallowed her. Investigators reconstructed her last known movements with mechanical precision. She called her sister at 8:42 p.m., a short, light conversation about weekend plans. She answered an email from a parent at 9:03 p.m., apologizing for a student's failing grade. A neighbor walking his dog saw her on the porch around 9:30, leaning against the railing, arms crossed, staring out into the street. He said something about her posture unsettled him. She looked like someone listening to something he couldn't hear. But he didn't stop to ask, didn't linger. It was a safe neighborhood. a quiet one. People didn't imagine danger lurking behind gentle silence. By morning, her bed was untouched. Her phone was left charging beside it. And Claire was gone. Detectives entered her house with cautious steps, expecting some sign of chaos. A tipped chair, a scuffed floorboard, a drawer yanked open. But the place felt staged, as if someone had wiped away every trace of interruption. The only thing out of place was a single sandal lying near the back door. Not tossed, not kicked, just resting on its side. Gentle, deliberate. As if it had been placed there by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The back door was unlocked. That detail split the neighborhood in half. Some insisted she must have left willingly. Others swore Claire never left doors open. She locked windows even when she was home. She double-checked deadbolts, out of habit. Her sister confirmed it. Her coworkers confirmed it. Her landlord confirmed it. That unlocked door felt like someone tapping officers on the shoulder, whispering, "Look closer." And yet, strangely, the doorframe was unmarked. No scratches, no pressure points, no indication of a break-in. Whoever touched it had done so softly, confidently, as if they had touched it 1,000 times before. Police canvassed the block within hours. Every neighbor gave the same bewildered expression, the same slow shake of the head. Everyone except one man, the neighbor immediately to her left. He answered the police with a calmness that bordered on rehearsed. His voice didn't tremble. His hands didn't fidget. He offered iced tea to detectives while insisting he knew nothing, saw nothing, heard nothing. He spoke with the polite detachment of someone discussing weather patterns, not a missing woman who lived 20 feet away. They wrote down his statement. They thanked him for his time. They moved on. The old man who lived across the street was less composed. He described seeing something, a figure, a shadow, a something, standing still at the end of Claire's driveway around midnight. When asked to clarify, he faltered, said maybe he imagined it, said maybe it was the dark playing tricks. But his voice wavered when he insisted the figure never moved, never shifted, never walked away. It simply vanished like smoke dissolving into night. Search teams fanned out across fields and drainage ditches. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Bloodhounds sniffed through brush and pavement. Volunteers stapled posters to every pole from one side of the county to the other. And still, nothing.
No footprints. No fibers.
No scrap of clothing. Not even a rumor strong enough to lean on. Reporters pounced on the story. Young teacher disappears without a trace. No struggle. No leads. No explanations. They aired segments about her smile, her kindness, her students' grief. They filled airtime with speculation, turning Claire into a symbol, a reminder that danger could bloom anywhere, even in quiet places where people slept with windows open. The case stalled within weeks. Investigators reviewed every interview, every scrap of evidence, every timeline revision, but the pieces refused to merge. It was like assembling a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the rest replaced with duplicates. Detectives started hoping for mistakes, bad tips, false sightings, something to break the deadlock. But the silence stretched on. Months passed, then years. And the missing person posters faded under sun and rain until they looked like ghosts peeling off telephone poles. Claire's family begged for updates. None came. The case went from active investigation to limited inquiry to the thing no detective ever wants to admit out loud, a cold case. Stored in a binder.
Shelved.
Revisited only when a new theory drifted in or a new officer wanted practice studying dead ends. Her house was sold, remodeled, resold. Someone planted new flowers. Someone painted the shutters blue. Life moved on in the way life stubbornly does. Until the evidence database changed everything. In 2024, the state launched a new forensic digitization initiative. Every unsolved case was reprocessed, rescanned, retested. An analyst checking old case files flagged a sample from Claire's back door. A trace swabbed from the inside handle. Labeled as belonging to Claire but marked inconclusive. An anomaly buried in decades of paperwork. The analyst ran it again. And the test came back with a result that cracked open history. It wasn't Claire's DNA. It wasn't some drifter, some stranger, some phantom passing through town. The genetic match traced directly to the neighbor who had offered detectives iced tea. The neighbor who said he heard nothing, saw nothing. The neighbor who lived 20 feet from Claire's door and remained there for 26 years, aging quietly inside the same walls, walking the same path from driveway to mailbox every morning. His name resurfaced like a body long submerged. Officers returned to his house in 2024 with evidence in hand. A short walk across the yard, but a long journey from the polite, easygoing man they remembered from the original file. He opened the door slowly. No shock in his eyes. Only a tired understanding, as if 26 years of waiting had finally arrived to collect him. But the DNA match, astonishing as it was, didn't answer the real questions. Didn't explain how Claire disappeared without a struggle. Didn't reveal what happened in the hours between her last seen moment and the dawn that exposed her absence. Didn't confirm motive, opportunity, or truth. Because the DNA alone didn't paint a picture. It just lit a fuse. Investigators found themselves staring at a mystery that hadn't faded with time. It had sharpened. The original interviews, the old rumors, the strange sightings, the single sandal by the door, the shadow at the driveway's edge, all of it surged back with new weight, as if the case itself was breathing again. The arrest shocked the neighborhood. People whispered in driveways, pointing at the house with curtains always drawn. But underneath the shock lay something darker, a sense that the story didn't end there. That the DNA was just a key, not the lock. That whatever happened in 1998 had been buried so effectively, so cleanly, that even the truth felt incomplete. And in the dim storage room where Claire's cold case binder sat for decades, one thing became painfully clear. The case was no longer cold. It was waking up. They brought him into the station just after sunset, a quiet man in a plain gray shirt, the kind of man no one remembers standing behind them in line at the grocery store. He didn't protest, didn't demand a lawyer,
didn't ask why.
He simply followed the officers, a slow nod, a slow breath, as if checking off an appointment he'd known was coming for decades. His hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with something closer to resignation. A kind of acceptance that felt rehearsed, like a man who'd been waiting for footsteps on his porch for half his life. Detectives watched him through the glass, their reflections hovering over his still form. 26 years of silence sat between them, heavy as a locked door no one wanted to open. They laid the DNA report on the table. His fingerprint hovered above it, hesitating, then settling on the paper's edge. As if touching the truth might burn him. He didn't deny the match. He didn't react at all. He only said he had no idea how his genetic material ended up inside Claire's back door. A sentence too calm, too composed, too clean. A line spoken by someone who had practiced sounding innocent. But the detectives weren't convinced. Too much about Claire's disappearance had hovered around him like a faint odor no one could trace. His yard bordered hers. His kitchen window faced her bedroom. His schedule overlapped with hers in quiet, predictable rhythms: trash day, mailbox walks, morning routines. The kind of proximity investigators always look at, always question, always highlight in red. But back then he had been overlooked, overshadowed by a maze of dead ends that felt more urgent. So he slipped through the cracks, living his life in the shadow of a crime no one could see. The questions began gently, then sharpened, then tightened like a vice. Where were you after 9 p.m. that night? What were you doing between midnight and dawn? Why didn't you hear the dog barking, the shift of air, the faint whimper the neighbor swore he heard? He repeated the same lines. He was home, asleep, unaware of anything unusual. But something in his tone felt brittle, as if the words were pressed too tightly together to hide the spaces between them. Investigators turned up the pressure. They placed photos on the table, the porch light flickering, the sandal by the door, the empty driveway. He stared at each image with the blankness of someone studying unfamiliar landscapes. But when they reached the picture of Claire smiling, he blinked. A quick, startled motion, almost imperceptible. And the detectives felt the shift. A crack in the quiet. The first tremor. Still, he said nothing. While he sat in that room, a different team combed through his house, the same house he'd lived in since the 90s. A house that felt unchanged, preserved in the habits of a man who rarely entertained visitors. Books stacked neatly, tools arranged with military precision, a calendar blank except for reminders to water plants and pay bills.
No troufis, no journals, no personal relics.
But an emptiness too curated, too calculated, as if someone had cleaned not for guests but for ghosts. They checked his yard, the flower beds, the garage, the crawl space. Every hinge, every loose panel, every patch of ground that looked recently disturbed. But the home revealed nothing. No trace of Claire, no hints of violence, no hidden compartments. Nothing that screamed guilt. Only silence, layered over silence. The neighbors gathered on their porches, whispering, pointing, trying to connect 26 years of ordinary interactions with the man now sitting under interrogation lights. Some recalled seeing him watching Claire water her garden. Others remembered him offering to fix her fence. A few mentioned hearing arguments from his yard, low, muffled voices. But memories warp with time. Some inflate. Some dissolve. Some reshape themselves around fear. Investigators collected every account, even the contradictions, weaving them into a timeline full of holes. And still the man said nothing. Detectives brought in a second team, specialists in cold case behavioral patterns. They studied his posture, his speech cadence, his eye movements. They concluded he wasn't lying, but he wasn't telling the truth either. He hovered in the space between, the gray zone where people cling to half-statements like life rafts. A man who constructed his answers as carefully as he mowed his lawn. Straight lines. Predictable patterns. Nothing that revealed the shape of the person beneath. They moved on to motive. There was none in his records. No violent past, no restraining orders, no unusual purchases. His life was painfully clean. He worked maintenance jobs, paid bills, kept to himself. But sometimes absence of motive is a motive in itself. Quiet men often hold the loudest secrets. And detectives felt the old familiar pressure of a story they couldn't quite see, but sensed lurking behind a closed door. When the interrogation hit its fourth hour, he finally shifted. A small move, crossing his hands, leaning back, lowering his gaze. Detectives recognized it immediately. A posture of withholding. Not defiance, not fear, control. As if he knew more than they did and planned to guard it with careful silence. But they weren't the only ones watching. In the property room, officers examined the contents of his attic, a space thick with dust and memories no one had touched in years. They found boxes of tax records, old clothes, rusted holiday decorations. Nothing unusual, until they found a single plastic container pushed into a corner. Inside, a faded notebook, blank except for one page, scrawled with numbers, dates, times, and an address. Claire's address. The dates matched the weeks before her disappearance. The times were clustered around late nights and early mornings. Surveillance? Routine observations? Something darker? The handwriting offered no clues. It wasn't neater than the rest. It wasn't frantic, just precise. A man cataloging something he didn't want to forget. They brought the notebook to him. This time, he reacted. His breath caught.
Barely.
But enough. Detectives pushed again. Was he watching her? Was he tracking her habits? Did he write these notes himself? His denial was softer now, less certain. He claimed he didn't remember the notebook. Said maybe it wasn't his. Said anyone could have placed it there. But his voice wavered on the word anyone, stretching it thin, exposing a tremor he couldn't hide. They pressed harder. He shut down completely. Hours later, they released him, procedurally, legally, reluctantly. DNA placed him inside Claire's house. The notebook tied him to her timeline. But without witnesses, without a body, without a confession, the case remained an echo without shape. A shadow that pointed toward guilt without reaching it. He walked out of the station through a hallway lined with officers who stared at him with the uneasy tension of men watching a storm form. Flashbulbs exploded outside as reporters shoved microphones toward him, shouting questions he ignored. He climbed into the back of a patrol car escorting him home, his face unreadable through the window. But the neighborhood didn't welcome him back. Porch lights glared brighter that night. Curtains twitched as people peered through slits. Parents pulled their children indoors. The quiet street that once felt harmless now pulsed with fear. Not because they had answers, but because they didn't. Uncertainty is more dangerous than guilt. It allows the imagination to grow teeth. Investigators, meanwhile, dug deeper. They combed through old interviews, reviewing statements under new light. Claire's sister mentioned once, in passing, that Claire felt watched. She dismissed it, said Claire sometimes got anxious when walking to her car at night. But the timing aligned too neatly. A few coworkers recalled Claire talking about a man who made her uncomfortable, though she never said who. A student said she sometimes checked the windows during class as if expecting someone outside. All tiny threads, never tied together.
Until now.
Detectives returned to the original crime scene, Claire's old house, now owned by a couple who had remodeled everything except the foundation. The new owners allowed a full forensic sweep. Officers pulled up floorboards, scanned the soil beneath the deck. Blacklight walls painted over dozens of times. The house resisted giving up secrets. But somewhere behind the drywall, somewhere under the tile, somewhere in the spaces most people don't look, investigators sensed something waiting, a truth pressed thin by time, but not erased. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying warmth over the yard. The same kind of warmth Claire felt the night she vanished. Officers stood in the driveway, imagining her figure under the porch light, imagining the shape the old man had seen at midnight, imagining the moment something reached out and took her without leaving a trace. One detective whispered that the case felt wrong. Not just unsolved, distorted. As if someone had rearranged the puzzle pieces before they ever arrived. As if the story everyone believed for 26 years was only the surface of something deeper, older, and darker. And then a new detail emerged, one so small it was almost dismissed. A neighbor 2 houses down remembered something strange from that summer in 1998. A sound, soft, metallic, coming from the side of Claire's house around 2 in the morning. Not construction. Not an animal. Something more deliberate. Like a latch sliding. Like a hinge turning. Like a door opening in the dark. They never reported it. They didn't think it mattered. But now it mattered more than anything. Because every new detail pointed in the same direction. Toward the man next door. Toward the notebook in his attic. Toward a disappearance too clean to be an accident. And toward a truth that refused to stay buried any longer. The days after his release felt unnervingly quiet, like the moment before a storm when everything holds its breath. Detectives weren't sleeping. Neighbors weren't resting. And he, this man whose DNA now lived inside a disappearance, walked through his routines as if nothing had changed. He watered his yard at dawn. He drove to the same hardware store he'd worked at for years. He nodded at the crossing guard when he passed the elementary school. But the nod wasn't returned anymore. Eyes followed him, suspicion trailing behind him like a shadow pulling at his heels. Every movement he made was observed, dissected, whispered about. Detectives knew they needed more. DNA on a doorknob was damning but not definitive. A notebook with dates was chilling, but not conclusive. They needed something harder, something that pierced 26 years of silence and stripped the case of ambiguity. So they pulled every scrap of archived evidence, every faded photograph, every tape so old it had his lines running across the audio, and began reconstructing the case from the ground up. They started with the timeline. Not the official one, not the clean sequence recorded in the original case file, but the messy, human one. The one shaped by memory, fear, routine, and coincidence. And the deeper they dug, the more the timeline buckled. A neighbor's recollection contradicted the police's early assumptions. A phone call timestamp didn't match the distance between Claire's house and the grocery store where she was last seen earlier that evening. A witness had misremembered whether the porch light flickered before or after the dog began barking. Tiny fractures. Harmless at first glance. But together they formed a web of inconsistencies that made investigators wonder whether someone had shaped the original narrative. Someone meticulous. Someone nearby. They re-examined the man next door's statements from 1998. Every sentence, every breath, every pause. He claimed he was asleep during the window of her disappearance. But his work schedule at the time suggested otherwise. He'd been on rotating shifts for years, accustomed to waking at odd hours. When detectives compared his sleep claims to his time card entries, the story cracked. He wasn't supposed to work the next morning, meaning there was no reason for him to retire early. His "I was asleep" line now felt less like truth and more like strategy. They searched for old surveillance footage from local businesses, grainy, black and white fragments, most of them corrupted beyond use. But the grocery store camera captured a trunk parked across the lot. A trunk eerily similar to the one he used to drive. The angle was terrible, the image distorted. But the timestamp hovered dangerously close to Claire's final known location. Investigators leaned over the screen, eyes narrowing. Almost. Almost enough. But almost doesn't convict. So they searched his past instead. Not for crimes. For patterns. His previous residences. His acquaintances. A neighbor from an old apartment complex remembered him watching people from his balcony late at night. A co-worker recalled him memorizing schedules, something about liking predictability. A former roommate said he kept detailed notes of everything. When people left for work, when they returned, when they turned lights on or off. Not sinister on its own. But stacked like bricks, they formed the silhouette of a man obsessed with routine, his and others. Investigators began to suspect he hadn't chosen Claire randomly, that he had studied her, learned her rhythms, known when she woke, when she slept, when she watered her plants, when she turned the porch light on. And somewhere along that line of silent observation, something shifted in him. Want, fixation, resentment, no one could say. But fixations don't evaporate. They simmer. Still, the question that haunted detectives wasn't why he did it.
It was how.
How do you remove a person from a fully lit house without leaving a trace? How do you remove a woman who is awake, moving, alert? How do you erase signs of struggle? How do you take someone without being seen by neighbors who are awake, by dogs who bark at the slightest sound, by the world itself? Unless Claire trusted him. Unless she opened the door willingly. That possibility hit investigators like a punch. The unlocked door, once a curiosity, became a spotlight. Had he knocked softly? Had he said something she believed? Had he asked for help? Borrowed something? Returned something? Had she looked through the peephole, seen the familiar face of a neighbor, and unlatched the door without a second thought? The scenario fit too cleanly. And in that moment, detectives no longer saw him as a man sitting quietly in his living room pretending life was normal. They saw him standing in her doorway 26 years earlier, a faint smile, a calm voice, a plan hidden beneath ordinary politeness. They needed to shake him. So they visited him again. He opened the door with the same expressionless calm. But this time, the silence stretched too long. Fear wasn't visible on his face, but it clung to the edges, tight shoulders, a slight quiver in his jaw, eyes that tracked every detective's movement. They told him about the notebook. He said nothing. They told him about the grocery store footage. Still nothing. They told him they planned to search his property again, this time with ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and forensic analysts trained to detect microscopic soil disturbances. A flicker, a muscle twitch below his left eye. And, for investigators, that was enough. The next morning the search began. Bright vests, metal detectors, barking dogs, the hum of machinery shattering the quiet street. Neighbors watched from porches as officers pulled up sections of his backyard, the ground turning into a patchwork of exposed soil. Dogs circled, noses low, tails stiff. Officers pried up old stepping stones, sifted through compost, tested the shed floor for chemical traces. Every corner of the yard was violated in the name of truth. But again, they found nothing. It wasn't just frustrating. It was insulting. As if the ground itself refused to help. As if he had buried not a body, but the entire truth so carefully that even the land conspired to keep it hidden. Detectives gathered that evening in Claire's old yard instead. A quiet wind rustled through the new owner's garden. The porch light glowed steady, not flickering like the bulb from 1998. They tried imagining the scene again, the final minutes before Claire vanished. And then one detective noticed something odd. The fence. The fence between Claire's house and his. It had been rebuilt, repainted, and replaced over the years. But the post alignment didn't match the original property line shown in the 1998 crime scene photos. The old fence leaned, slightly warped. The new one stood straight. And the soil around the posts, newer, darker, recently turned within the last year. He had replaced the fence.
Why?
Detectives felt adrenaline spike. They brought forensic tools, dug beside the fence line, chipped away at soil that clung too tightly to the posts. And deeper down, beneath fresh dirt and decaying wood, they found remnants of the original fence post, cut too precisely, severed rather than broken. The discovery sharpened into a chilling thought. He wasn't replacing a fence. He was removing something attached to it. Something embedded. Something he didn't want investigators to find. Detectives bagged the fragments, sent them to the lab, and waited. The results came back with a single line. Biological trace detected. A trace too degraded for identification. Too faint for certainty. But too significant to ignore. They returned to him with the lab report. This time, he didn't hide the panic. His breath grew shallow. He backed up slightly, as if distance could undo evidence. Detectives stepped inside.
He didn't stop them.
Maybe because he couldn't. Maybe because everything he'd built, every lie, every silence, every ordinary routine, had started collapsing. He sat down slowly, hands clasped, knuckles white. And then he said something he hadn't said in 26 years. I didn't mean for anything to happen. Detectives froze. It wasn't an admission, not legally. But it was the first crack in his wall of denial. They pushed. Hard. What didn't he mean? What happened? Why Claire? Why the notes? Why the DNA? Why the fence? He shook his head, eyes closing briefly, as if replaying memories he'd spent half his life outrunning. But every word he said afterward slid sideways, avoiding the truth entirely. He claimed he never harmed her. Claimed she came to his house voluntarily. Claimed she trusted him enough to visit late at night. Claims that contradicted everything investigators knew about Claire. They kept pressing. He kept dodging. But the more he spoke, the more the story darkened. He hinted at arguments, at misunderstandings, at secrets Claire supposedly kept. None of it made sense. None of it matched the bright, organized, steady woman described by those who loved her. Unless he wasn't describing Claire. He was describing how he wanted her to be. Obsessions twist memories. They rewrite reality. And detectives began to see him clearly, not as a man who snapped, but as a man who built a world around someone who never knew she was inside it. But one question still gnawed at them. If he took her, where was she? They asked him directly. He went silent. Then he whispered. Some things stayed buried. The room froze. Detectives leaned in. He didn't speak again. He just stared at the wall, unblinking, like a man seeing ghosts. And outside, the wind cut through the street with a coldness that didn't belong to Texas. Something had shifted. The truth was close. But close truth can be the most dangerous kind. The detectives left his house that night carrying the weight of his final whisper like a live wire in their hands.
Something stayed buried.
The phrase echoed through the patrol car, through the briefing room, through every investigator's mind as they pinned new photos to the evidence board. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even a clue. It was an opening, thin, precarious, but unmistakably there. A shift in the case that felt like the ground itself had tilted. They replayed every second of the interrogation, analyzing tone, posture, timing. He had spoken the words slowly, almost tenderly, as if revisiting a moment he held onto for reasons no one wanted to understand. But the detectives knew something with absolute certainty now. He knew where Claire went. Whether by accident or intent, whether through loss of control or a plan fully formed, he knew and had known for 26 years. And the realization was nauseating. Investigators returned to the fence line before sunrise, long orange shadows stretching across the dirt as they peeled back more soil, more roots, more layers of time. They hoped the biological trace found in the first sample wasn't a fluke. They hoped for something concrete, something undeniable. But the deeper they dug, the quieter the earth became. Only traces, whispers, fragments of old wood, soil stratified by decades of weather. Nothing that answered the question that mattered. Where was Claire? The radar sweep extended to his front yard next. Then the side yard. Then beneath the shed again, but this time with different equipment. Thermal imaging, microresidue analysis, volatile compound tests that detect decomposition long after the body itself has vanished. The readings came back inconclusive. Not clean, not damning, somewhere between a scientific limbo too vague to classify. But one thing immediately caught the team's attention. The shed floor had been replaced. Fresh plywood, new nails, new adhesive residue, all installed within the last year. The new flooring sat atop a concrete slab older than the neighborhood itself, but when investigators chipped a corner of the concrete, they found irregularities in the mixture, pockets where something had once been embedded, then removed. Someone had disturbed this slab. Someone had corrected it. Someone had erased something beneath it. The man next door hadn't just lived his life quietly, he had curated it, shaped the environment around him as if arranging a crime scene in reverse, removing, not adding, hiding, not revealing. 26 years of maintenance, not to preserve innocence, but to preserve narrative. Detectives shifted their focus to his backyard again. Not the surface. The pipes. The drainage. The irrigation hoses he had installed himself in early 1999. They ran beneath the soil in looping lines, snaking so close to the fence that it felt intentional. Officers pulled them up carefully. And halfway down the line, one hose section had been cut, reconnected with a new coupler, the rubber surrounding it stained just slightly darker. A stain not visible to the naked eye, but unmistakable under luminol. Something had leaked there. Something organic. Something that didn't belong inside a garden hose. Detectives bagged the samples. They didn't speculatively label them. They didn't allow their suspicions to outrun the evidence. But they felt the net tightening, the edges of the case no longer frayed but drawing in, pulling everything toward the center where he sat in his quiet house pretending life still followed predictable rules. But the physical search wasn't enough. The case demanded more. So investigators returned to the human side of the story, the witnesses who had aged, the memories that had blurred, the secrets that had never been spoken aloud. Claire's sister came back to Texas the moment she heard about the DNA match. She stepped into the interrogation room not as a grieving relative, but as a woman sharpened by decades of unanswered questions. She told detectives something she never mentioned in 1998 because she never believed it mattered. 2 weeks before Claire vanished, she had confided that someone had been taking things from her porch. Small things, chalk, a pair of scissors, a ceramic pot she used for her succulents. Claire thought it was kids, or wind, or forgetfulness. But her sister remembered the way Claire's voice had dropped when she said she felt watched. Not threatened, not stalked, just observed. Now that detail felt radioactive. The detectives asked if Claire had ever mentioned him specifically. The sister shook her head, then stopped, thought, and slowly nodded. She remembered one comment, one offhand remark. He's kind, but there's something distant about him. A vague statement, but unmistakably about the neighbor. Detectives collected every scrap of Claire's belongings still preserved by her family. Journals, letters, a small camcorder she used in her classroom. They reviewed every tape, fast-forwarding through children's projects, reading her handwriting until their eyes blurred. Nothing overt pointed to him, but subtle things did. Moments where she paused when talking about her street, entries where she mentioned hearing footsteps in the yard late at night, references to dreams about someone standing by her window. Small details, almost invisible. But the case was built on the invisible. Investigators returned to the man next door again. Not with questions, with presence. They wanted him to feel watched now, wanted him to feel the pressure he had once placed on Claire. They wanted him to make a mistake. He answered the door with a stillness that bordered on eerie. No anger, no fear, just a quiet exhaustion. As if carrying his secret had become heavier than carrying the truth. They asked if he'd thought about coming in for another conversation.
He said no.
They asked if he would change his mind. He said no again. They asked if he was willing to explain the phrase he had whispered before. And this time, he didn't answer. He closed the door slowly, not slamming it, not shutting them out aggressively, just reducing the space between them until the latch clicked and the truth remained sealed behind wood. Inside, he sat down in his living room and stared at his hands. Officers watched through the window, the reflection of patrol lights flickering across his posture. He seemed to collapse inward, like a man folding under a weight that no longer had the strength to disguise itself. But he still didn't talk. Not yet. So detectives turned to the oldest witness of all, the land surrounding Claire's original home. Soil remembers differently than people. Soil shifts, breathes, erodes, but it never forgets completely. They brought in a forensic geologist, a woman who specialized in cold cases, relying on environmental memory. She studied the satellite photos from 1998, compared them to current aerial images, and pointed to a strange irregularity. The ground behind Claire's old garden sloped differently now than it did then. Not naturally. Artificially. Someone had moved a significant amount of soil in late 1998 or early 1999. Enough to fill a small pit. Enough to hide something the size of a suitcase or a box or... Detectives didn't say the word. They just started digging. The new homeowners gave permission again. They watched nervously as investigators pulled up their garden beds. Officers dug in careful squares, marking each layer of soil as if peeling pages from a history no one had meant to read. Hours passed. Dirt flew. The sun moved across the yard. And then a sound, a dull metallic scrape, rang out beneath a shovel's blade. Something buried. Something solid. Everyone froze. Gloves tightened. Cameras rolled. A detective swept away the dirt with a brush until the object emerged fully, a metal box, rusted, edges eaten by time. A box no one had placed there in the past 2 decades. When they lifted it out, the weight shocked them. Not heavy.
Light.
Too light. Inside they found objects, but not the one they dreaded. Instead, a hair ribbon.
Blue. Frayed.
A set of keys that didn't match Claire's car. A notebook with the cover torn off. A small figurine, a ceramic bird, missing a wing. All items unconnected at first glance. But the ceramic bird was unmistakable. It matched the broken figurine from Claire's dining shelf. The missing wing had never been found. Detectives stared at the objects and felt a new kind of dread filling the air. Not fear of what happened, but fear of what was still missing. Because the box wasn't a grave. It was a shrine. A collection. A preservation of moments stolen from Claire's life without her knowing. Items that belonged to her. Items she had touched. Items she had lost and never thought about again. He had been keeping pieces of her. Pieces she never knew were missing. Pieces that proved something far more chilling than opportunity or motive. He had been inside her life long before he stepped inside her house. Detectives returned to him with the box. And when he saw it, his composure shattered. A single sound escaped his throat, a breath that broke into a tremor, ending in something between a gasp and a whimper. His hands flew to his face. Not in shock, not in fear, in grief. A grief so raw it felt wrong. Detectives held their breath. He whispered 5 words. 5 words that froze every person in the room. She wasn't supposed to die. The silence afterward felt like a scream. And in that moment, detectives knew the truth wasn't buried. Not really. It was right there, trembling in a voice that had waited 26 years to break. He said the words quietly at first, barely audible, as if they had been waiting behind his teeth for 26 years and finally slipped through the cracks. She wasn't supposed to die. The detectives didn't move, didn't exhale. didn't dare interrupt the fragile moment that hung between them like a trembling wire. His shoulders curved inward, collapsing as if he had been holding his spine rigid since 1998 and only now allowed himself to break. His palms pressed against his face, hiding everything but the tremor in his fingers. But guilt doesn't crumble so easily. It resists. It reshapes. And even now, even with the box laid out before him like a wound torn open, he refused to say more. The detectives leaned in, voices low, steady, coaxing. They told him they needed the truth. They told him silence wasn't protection anymore. Not for him. Not for the ghost of a woman stolen in the dark. They told him evidence was rising like floodwater. But he only shook his head, slow and desperate, as if he were drowning in something older than fear. They asked him what happened. Silence. They asked why the objects were buried between the yards. Silence. They asked why Claire wasn't supposed to die. His voice finally cracked. It was supposed to stop. No one understood what that meant. He didn't clarify. He just stared at the ceramic bird in the evidence tray, the missing wing, the tiny fracture across its glaze, and something in his eyes shifted, like a memory taking shape behind fog. Detectives pushed harder. He didn't break. Not yet. So they left him with officers standing watch and returned to the evidence board. The metal box wasn't just a stash of stolen items. It was a timeline. Every object represented a moment he crossed into Claire's life. The broken figurine, the ribbon, the notebook, the keys. Each item an invisible fingerprint on the story that had gone unnoticed for more than 2 decades. Investigators sorted through them like pages of a forgotten diary. The ribbon matched Claire's hairstyle in a photo taken by one of her students in March 1998. The notebook contained half a grocery list written in a hand that resembled hers, though no one could confirm it. And the keys, they weren't hers. Not from her home, not from her car, not from her classroom. But the blank metal tag attached to the ring bore a faint engraving, A17. A storage unit number. They tracked it down within hours, a facility 15 minutes away, the kind where identical doors stretched into narrow corridors smelling faintly of dust and chemical cleaner. The rental records from 1998 were scanned and archived. The tenant listed for Unit A17 was a name that pulled the detectives into absolute silence. Not his. Claire's. Except she never rented a storage unit. Her sister confirmed that. Her landlord confirmed it. Her bank records showed no payments. Her diary never mentioned one. Claire lived a life of tight routines, organized finances, predictable habits. She would not have hidden a storage unit from her family. The entire concept felt foreign to her. But someone had rented it in her name. Someone with access to her personal details. Someone with quiet precision. Someone living next door. They requested a warrant. When they opened Unit A17, stale air spilled out, carrying the scent of time sealed in concrete. Dust floated through the flashlight beams. At first glance, the unit appeared empty.
Bara walls.
Bare floor.
Bara corners.
But something felt wrong. The dust wasn't evenly spread. The back wall bore faint scrape marks. A rectangle outlined in cleaner concrete betrayed the shape of something once resting there. Something large. Something recently moved. Detectives found a single object left behind, a scrap of paper tucked under a bolt in the floor. A newspaper clipping from 1998. Claire's picture. The headline, "Local Teacher Vanishes from Quiet Suburban Street." Someone had folded the article 3 times, then smoothed it out and folded it again, as if the hands handling it couldn't decide what to do with the weight of the truth printed on the page. The existence of the storage unit changed everything. It suggested planning, intention, a place to store something tied to the disappearance. And whatever had been inside wasn't there anymore. Detectives returned to him, armed with the discovery. When they mentioned the storage unit, he closed his eyes. When they showed him the clipping, the muscles in his jaw jumped. When they asked what had been inside, he whispered, "I didn't want it." They asked what he meant. He didn't answer. They asked what he moved from the unit. He said nothing. They asked if Claire had been inside. He recoiled, not in fear, but in anguish. an emotion too raw to be fabricated. The room thickened with it. He finally murmured, "It wasn't supposed to go that far." Detectives pressed again, harder, riding the line between persistence and fracture. They needed him unstable enough to reveal the truth, but steady enough to articulate it. They asked if he heard her. He shook his head violently. They asked if she died in his house. He shook harder. They asked if he took her. He didn't shake this time. He didn't move at all. His stillness became the answer. Detectives took a breath. They asked what he did with her. And for the first time, he looked at them, not with fear, not with guilt, but with a kind of devastated clarity, as if he were seeing something that had haunted him from the corner of every room for 26 years. "She trusted me," he whispered. The words were sharper than a confession. They cut straight through the room, lodging in the silence between heartbeat and breath. Claire had trusted him. She had opened her door. She had let him step inside her world. The detectives felt nausea rising like heat. They asked why she trusted him. He said nothing. They asked what he wanted from her. His eyes filled with something impossible to interpret: love, obsession, delusion, sorrow. A confusing cocktail that made his next sentence even harder to absorb. "I just needed her to understand." "Understand what?" they asked. He shook his head again, but softer, like someone declining to revisit a memory too painful to articulate.
They asked what happened that night.
His breath hitched. His voice grew thinner, shrinking into the small space between them. "She told me to leave." A pause. And then she fell. The detective stared. Fell? Where?
How?
Onto what? Off what? He didn't elaborate. His hands trembled again. He repeated the sentence like a mantra.
She fell. She fell. She fell.
Each repetition drained the room further. Detectives pressed the details. Did she try to run? Did she faint? Did he push her? He refused to speak the next words. But silence is its own confession. And then he added something new, something colder, heavier. "I panicked. They waited." Breath halted. "And I hit her." No one spoke. He kept going, voice cracking between each word like brittle glass. He said he couldn't call for help.
Said he couldn't think.
Said he only did what his fear allowed. He said he moved her. He said he put her somewhere he thought no one would look. But he never said where. Detectives asked. He didn't answer. They asked again. Still nothing. It was as if the part of him that had confessed was gone, replaced by the same impenetrable stillness he'd worn for 26 years. A shield reforming. A door slamming shut. They searched the storage facility for traces of decomposition. Nothing. They pulled logs. Someone had accessed the unit shortly after Claire vanished. Then again in 1999. Then never again. Whoever moved something inside had done so with precision and caution. Detectives drove home through thickening dusk, headlights cutting through a street where porch lights glowed like beacons of suspicion. People whispered. People watched. Fear had turned the neighborhood into a breathing organism with too many eyes. The detectives returned to the backyard one last time. They stood in the dark between the two houses, the space where the fence had stood, where the shrine had been buried, where the earth felt uneasy beneath their boots. The night air vibrated with cicadas, a wall of sound that filled the silence Claire once occupied. One detective said the truth lay somewhere in the space between his grief and his lies. Another said the truth lay in the storage unit, emptied like a grave whose body had been relocated. Another said the truth lay beneath concrete, or beneath soil, or beneath years of fear that shaped a man into something unrecognizable. But one detective, the quiet one, the one who saw connections others missed, whispered something else. What if she never left this street? The others stared. What if the thing he buried wasn't the only thing he moved? A chill cut through the warm Texas night. What if she's still here? In the soil. In the foundations. In the crawl spaces. In the one place no one wanted to imagine. And somewhere in his house, he sat in his living room, staring at the blank television screen, seeing something no screen could show him, hearing echoes no room should hold, feeling the weight of a truth trying to claw its way out of the dark. He whispered once more, to no one, "I didn't mean for her to die." But intent doesn't resurrect the missing. And the night held its breath again, deeper this time, as if bracing for what investigators were about to uncover next. By morning, detectives had circled the entire street with maps, soil reports, structural diagrams, and photographs from 1998 laid out on car hoods under the rising Texas sun. The quiet detective's theory, what if she never left this street, clung to the air like humidity, gathering weight with every breath. It wasn't a theory anyone wanted.
It was too intimate, too horrifying.
But cases don't care about comfort. They care about truth. And truth, especially the kind buried for decades, rarely rests in far-off places. It tends to stay close, like guilt. They began the new search with the crawl spaces beneath the homes. Most were shallow, dusty pockets of cobwebs and insulation, places where critters scurried and plumbers cursed. But detectives weren't looking for something obvious. They were looking for anomalies, shifts in soil density, cuts in the support beams, any sign that someone had altered the foundation of a life to hide the disappearance of another. Claire's old house appeared first on the list. The new owners watched nervously as officers removed access panels and slid beneath the floorboards, flashlights slicing through darkness. Dust swirled like disturbed memories. The air felt heavy. But after hours of crawling and scraping and scanning, officers emerged with nothing but grime on their uniforms.
No unusual soil patterns.
No buried items.
No hidden cavities.
The detective in charge rubbed a hand across his jaw. "It doesn't feel like she was here," he said. "Not underneath. Not inside. But the yard that's still wrong. Something happened out here." They expanded the soil grid behind the house, digging deeper, wider, slicing the lawn into sections like a forensic chessboard. They found earth compacted in strange, inconsistent ways, some loose, some stiff, some cracked from previous disruption. But again, no remains, no clothing, no concrete truth. One officer finally voiced what everyone had been thinking. If he hid her, he didn't leave her here. But the quiet detective shook her head, pushing her boot lightly into the dirt.
No.
He hid objects here. Objects he couldn't stand to have in his house. That box wasn't his guilt, it was his fear. He buried pieces of her because he couldn't bury her. She pointed toward his home next door. He buried her somewhere he could control. Those words unfurled a new dread. If he wanted control, he wouldn't choose somewhere vulnerable. He wouldn't risk neighbors stumbling across her. He wouldn't risk soil erosion, storms, animals. Control meant permanence. Control meant concrete. Control meant inside his own house. Minutes later, Detective stood in his living room. He sat in the corner, hands folded, eyes hollow. He didn't protest the search warrant. He didn't speak at all. He simply watched as officers moved through his house with a new, sharper purpose. They scanned the floor with thermal cameras, tracing cold pockets and heat signatures. They tapped walls, listening for hollows. They measured distances between studs. They checked grout lines in the tile for inconsistencies. Nothing glaring, nothing obvious. But something about the living room flooring bothered them. A faint resonance difference when tapping one particular section, as though the subflooring were thicker there. They marked it, then moved on. The bathroom tiles near the tub carried microfractures inconsistent with age. Investigators kneeled, inspecting grout lines so small they looked like veins. Something had pressed there once. Something heavy. Something dragged. They marked it, then moved on. Finally, they reached the garage, a space that smelled of oil, dust, and loneliness. The concrete here was newer, lighter in color than the rest of the slab. The quiet detective crouched, running her fingertips across the surface.
Smooth.
Too smooth. Someone had re-poured this section. They called for ground-penetrating radar. The device mapped the subsurface shape, a shallow dip, then a slump, then a patch where concrete had been torn up and relaid. A cavity once existed beneath that slab. A cavity large enough to hold something. Or someone. Detectives turned toward him. He didn't flinch. He only watched the radar screen with a kind of hollow acceptance, his eyes reflecting the jagged black and white shapes of a truth that refused to stay buried any longer. Before breaking the concrete, they needed verification. The forensic geologist examined the slab composition. The new section contained a slightly different aggregate mix, a brand sold only after 1999, a full year after Claire vanished. That meant the slab had been tampered with a year after her disappearance. Detectives didn't wait anymore. They drilled. They hammered. They broke through the surface like breaking through the surface of a sealed memory. Dust billowed. Chips flew. The sound of metal striking concrete echoed across the street, drawing neighbors to their windows, tightening the fear not already wrapped around the block. Minutes passed. Then hours. And finally, a shout broke through the noise. Here, there's an air pocket. Detectives crowded around as the last concrete layer was pried away. Beneath it lay a small hollowed space, barely deep enough to hold a crate. And inside that space, they found nothing. No body.
No clothing. No bones.
Just compacted dirt and the faint imprint of something rectangular once resting there. A box. Large enough to hold a person curled tightly. Or perhaps something else, tools, objects, wrapped bundles. Whatever had been there was gone now, removed long ago. But the imprint was unmistakable. Something had been hidden in that cavity. Something had been there long enough to leave a shape. Something taken right before the concrete was replaced. Something he had moved. Detectives lifted the broken slab, studying the cavity as though it might whisper. They scraped samples from the interior. A chemist tested the soil with handheld equipment. Organic traces. Protein breakdown. Chemical signatures consistent with decomposition. He had buried something biological in that void. He had removed it later. The quiet detective knelt by the cavity, staring into the shallow depression. This is where she was, she whispered. Not her body. Not permanently. But pieces of what happened to her. Something he didn't want anyone to find. Her words hung like smoke. They returned to him, their footsteps heavy across the fractured concrete. He sat in a chair now, body slumped, hands resting limp in his lap. Dust from the drilling floated through the air behind him like ghostly snow. Detectives placed the soil report in front of him. He didn't look down. They told him decomposition traces had been found. No reaction. They told him the imprint inside the cavity suggested a long, rectangular object had been hidden there. Still no reaction. Finally, the quiet detective asked the question that mattered most. Where did you move her? A tremor shook his jaw. His fingers tightened on the arms of the chair. He inhaled sharply, chest rising with a breath too heavy, too loaded with things unsaid. I didn't move her. Detectives froze. He looked up slowly, eyes glistening with something dark, not sorrow, not fear. Something closer to shame. Or perhaps the crushing weight of a secret cracking inside his bones. I moved what was left. The room went still. They asked what that meant. But he only whispered, I wanted to protect her. Protect her from what? From who? From him? From the consequences of a night spiraling out of control? The more detectives pressed, the more his fragments of truth twisted into shapes none of them could decipher. He said Claire fell. He said he panicked. He said he hid her. Then he said he moved what was left. But none of it aligned. None of it formed a coherent confession. His memory felt like an intentionally shattered mirror, sharp pieces reflecting slivers of horror without revealing the full image. Detectives stepped outside, overwhelmed by the tightening maze. The neighbors watched from their porches, whispering theories that braided into the night air. Some believed he'd confessed. Some thought he was innocent. Some wondered if Claire had been alive longer than anyone imagined. But the quiet detective focused on something else, the gap in his story. The storage unit. The empty cavity. The shrine buried under the fence. These weren't random choices. They were waypoints. Markers on the path of a man trying to rewrite the aftermath of an accident or a crime into something he could bear. Where would a man like that go to hide what was left? Not far. Not where he could be seen. not where nature could expose him. A place with control. A place with isolation. A place with permanence. Then she saw it. The storm drain. At the edge of the street. A drain installed in 1997. Connected to an outdated underground channel. Accessible from yards. Large enough for someone crawling. Hidden from sight. Ignored for decades. Her breath caught.
She called the team.
Within minutes, officers pried open the grate. The smell of damp earth and stale air wafted upward. A long tunnel stretched into darkness, barely illuminated by flashlight beams. Investigators descended. Their boots splashed in shallow water. Mud clung to their legs. Rats scattered. The air grew colder the deeper they moved. After 20 feet, they found scrape marks along the concrete. Not recent, old.
Worn.
As if something had been dragged. As if a heavy object had rested here once. They followed the scrape marks deeper into the tunnel until the space widened slightly, forming a pocket where water pooled. And there, half buried in sediment, they found a scrap of fabric. Faded.
Torn.
Stuck to the wall by time. A floral pattern. Claire's sister recognized it instantly. It was from the dress Claire wore the night she vanished. Detectives stared at the fabric, then at the tunnel, then back toward the quiet suburban street above them. Whatever happened 26 years ago, it hadn't ended suddenly. It had unfolded in steps: panic, concealment, movement, burial, removal. A desperate, impossible dance to hide a truth that refused to stay hidden. They climbed out of the storm drain, the scrap of fabric sealed in evidence. The night air felt heavier than before, as though the street itself remembered what his memory tried to bury. One detective whispered, "This is where he put her first." The quiet detective whispered back, "Then where did he take her next?" And somewhere inside his house, the man sat alone in the chair detectives left him in, staring at the wall as if expecting it to speak. The truth was rising, and he could feel it closing in. The scrap of floral fabric changed everything. It wasn't just a clue, it was a pulse. A living thread tying Claire's last known moments to the dark underground channel that ran beneath the neighborhood, like a hidden artery. The detectives climbed out of the storm drain with mud on their uniforms and dread in their throats, knowing they had crossed a threshold. For years, the case had been speculation and absence. Now, for the first time, it had direction. The street itself had begun to speak. They returned to him. He hadn't moved from the chair, hadn't shifted, hadn't blinked enough to seem fully human. The news of the storm drain discovery didn't surprise him. His chest rose once, slow, resigned, defeated. As if he'd always known the truth would find its way back, crawling through mud and darkness until it surfaced, just like the fabric had. The quiet detective stepped forward.
She didn't shout.
She didn't threaten. She simply placed the evidence bag on the table in front of him and waited. The scrap inside looked small, but it carried the weight of a world undone.
He stared at it.
His eyes tightened. His mouth quivered. But he still didn't speak. They asked him if he put her in the drain. He shook his head. They asked if she ended up there by accident. He shook his head again. They asked how the fabric got there. He closed his eyes. And for the first time, he whispered a full sentence. "I didn't know she was still alive." The words detonated through the room. The detectives froze, adrenaline slicing through their composure.
Alive.
Alive when? Alive where? Alive after the fall he kept insisting happened? His voice trembled, and he looked smaller, like a man drowning in guilt so deep it had reshaped his memory. Detectives pressed him. Was she alive when she entered the house? When she fell? When he panicked? When he moved her? His voice splintered on the next admission. She was breathing when I carried her out. A sickening realization washed over the room. 26 years of imagining her gone instantly, lost in a single moment, unraveled. Claire may have lived beyond the initial event. She may have tried to speak, to move, to fight. She may have been conscious in the drain, in the dark, in the cold, waiting for help that never came. The detectives leaned in, voices sharp and urgent. Why didn't he call an ambulance? Why didn't he drive her to the hospital? Why didn't he get help? His breathing turned ragged. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought, if they found out she was hurt in my house. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The silence filled in the rest. He wasn't trying to save her. He was trying to save himself. Detectives felt their stomachs twist. They asked him when he realized she had died. His answer came out as a broken exhale. When I came back.
Back to the drain.
Back to the pocket of darkness where he left her. Back to the tunnel beneath the street. He said he returned later that night, though he didn't specify the hour. Time dissolves under panic. Hours blur into collapse. All he remembered was shining a flashlight into the drain and finding stillness.
No breath.
No movement. No hope. He said he touched her wrist, the way he'd seen paramedics do in movies. He felt nothing. And in that moment, something inside him, fear, grief, delusion, splintered into panic so full it consumed him. He convinced himself there was no saving her, that he'd already crossed the point of no return. So he hit her. Not out of malice. Out of cowardice. Out of a terror so primal it hollowed him out. Detectives asked him why he moved her again later. Why remove her from the drain and rebury her in the garage cavity? Why move her again after that? Why did the locations change? His answer chilled them to the bone. She started showing up. Not physically. Not literally. His mind betrayed him. He said he heard her in the house. Felt her presence at night. Thought he saw her silhouette near the fence. Thought he heard her breathing behind him. Thought she stood on his porch every time the wind shook the chimes. I couldn't sleep, he whispered. I couldn't eat. I thought if I moved her, maybe she would stop. Detectives listened with a mixture of horror and pity. In his mind, Claire hadn't died once. She died over and over again, each relocation an attempt to bury a truth he couldn't outrun. Each move a ritual of desperation. Each new hiding place a plea for silence. But the body was gone now. He had moved her again. And again. And the last location remained unknown. The detectives regrouped outside, the sun sinking behind roofs that now felt sinister, heavy with secrets. The storm drain answered the where she was first, and the garage cavity answered the where she was second. But the final location, the one after he repoured the concrete, after he cleaned the yard, after he buried the shrine, was still missing. They searched his house again. They searched the attic, lifted insulation, examined ductwork. They checked the water heater recess, the closets, the hollow behind the paneling where old electricians sometimes left tools. They found nothing but the stale scent of a man who lived with ghosts. So they stepped back outside. The quiet detective walked the perimeter of his house slowly, eyes studying every angle, every line. Then she saw it, a tool shed beyond the garden, older than the rest of the property. Weathered wood, rusty hinges, a padlock newer than the door itself. They had searched it before, superficially. No cavity beneath the floor. No false back. But something tugged at her attention now. She knelt and brushed her fingers along the soil around the shed's edge. It was uneven. Subtle, but uneven. The shed itself had been moved. A foot to the left. Maybe two. Not a big relocation, just enough to place it over something. She called the team. They lifted the structure with hydraulic jacks, inch by inch. And as the shed rose, a square of earth revealed itself, cleaner, darker, softer than the soil around it. Someone had dug here. Not recently. Not yesterday. Years ago. But long after 1998. Detectives began to dig. The soil felt wrong. Too loose beneath the top layer. Too aerated, as if disturbed and refilled. Deeper and deeper they dug, the tension rising with each shovelful, the air around them tightening like a drum. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, unable to look away. Then a sound, someone's shovel hitting something hollow. Everyone froze. Hands steadied. Cameras rolled. Officers knelt and scraped gently with gloved fingers until the outline emerged. Wood. A plank. Then another. A box far smaller than a coffin but larger than a keepsake. Built crudely. Hammered together with mismatched nails. Buried roughly 3 feet down. Tools paused. Breath held. The detectives lifted the box to the surface, its boards moaning under the pressure of being unearthed after so many years. They pried it open. The hinges resisted at first, then gave way with a groan. Inside. Not a body. Not bones. Not what they expected at all. Inside were objects, wrapped tightly in black plastic. A sweater, a hairbrush, a pair of shoes, a stack of letters, a coat, a pillowcase stained with something brown. The items filled the box. Overflowed from it. Layered like offerings. All Claire's. Or tied to Claire. Her last belongings. The ones investigators never found. He hadn't buried her. Not here. He had buried his guilt. His fear. His attachment. Detectives stared at the box, unable to speak. It wasn't a grave site. It was a reliquary. A final shrine. A place where a man tried to contain 26 years of torment. A place to put everything he couldn't face.
But still no body.
No remains. No answer to the question haunting the case like a shadow barely out of reach. Where is Claire? They carried the box to him, set it gently at his feet. He stared at it with a shattered expression, as if seeing the wreckage of his life laid open like a wound. Then something inside him broke. He whispered a location. One word. A place no one had searched. A place that had existed since 1998, but had never seemed significant. A place that explained everything. A place that froze detectives where they stood. A place so close, so obvious, so horrifyingly ordinary. They couldn't breathe. And as he spoke the word again, weaker this time, the entire street seemed to exhale in dread. The search was about to become something else entirely. Something final. Something the neighborhood would never forget. He whispered the location like a man confessing a sin too heavy for language, a place so mundane, so painfully ordinary. The detective struggled to understand the gravity of what he had just said. He didn't shout it, didn't choke it out. He simply exhaled the word, small and fragile, as if it had lived inside him for 26 years and finally slipped free. They stared at him. He stared at the floor. And the word hung in the air between them like a noose tightening around the entire room. The backyard. Not the soil. Not the shed space. Not the fence line. The tree. The detectives barely moved at first, trying to process it. The tree he mentioned was a pecan tree planted in the late 90s, a scrawny thing that had since grown tall, shading the property with wide branches and thick roots that coiled beneath the earth like veins. A tree that existed on dozens of old family photos. A tree neighbors leaned against while chatting. A tree children had climbed. A tree easily ignored because trees aren't evidence, they're scenery. Except in 1998, that tree had been only a sapling. And a shallow grave beneath a young sapling grows deeper with its roots. The quiet detective's breath hitched. A wave of sickness rolled through her. She knew what the tree meant. To bury something beneath a growing tree was to ensure nature itself concealed the truth. Roots spread, soil compacts, time erases the disturbance. The perfect hiding place, not because it was brilliant, but because it was invisible. The man looked up with a defeated tilt of his head, eyes glassy, voice raw. I didn't plan it. I just didn't know what else to do. Detectives didn't answer. There were no words. They moved. They moved fast. Patrol cars lit up the block. Neighbors poured onto porches, hands shaking, voices hushed into terrified murmurs. Officers cordoned off the yard. Floodlights rose like watchtowers, spilling harsh white beams across the grass. Cameras followed every step. The pecan tree loomed at the center, its leaves rustling with a sound too soft for what it might be hiding. He watched from the back seat of a patrol car, the reflection of flashing red and blue lights quivering over his hollow expression. He didn't look away. He watched the detectives gather shovels. He watched the forensic team prepare equipment. He watched the quiet detective kneel at the base of the tree and press her hand into the soil. She said nothing, but her silence trembled. The digging began. Slow at first. Careful. Measured. The soil was thick, dense with years of root growth. The deeper they dug, the more difficult the process became. The roots resisted, twisting around shovels, gripping the earth like secrets refusing to be released. An officer muttered, "This could take hours." The quiet detective shook her head. "We're not stopping." The street watched. Under the glare of lights, shovel after shovel broke into the earth. Sweat-drenched brows. Soil piled up around the trunk. Foot by foot, the ground surrendered to the past. Then a root thicker than the rest stopped them. It curved sharply, like something had once forced it to grow around an object. A void. A disruption. Aggrave. The root structure didn't lie. They moved to hand tools, slicing carefully, slowly, afraid of what the next inch might reveal. The quiet detective lifted a section of tangled roots. The dirt beneath them was darker, almost black. "Here," she whispered. An officer lowered a probe into the softened earth. It struck something solid. Metal. The quiet detective's breath caught. A container? The officer shook his head.
No.
Something else. They scraped around the object, every movement gentle, terrified, reverent. The shape emerged slowly, a curve, smooth, unyielding. Not a box. Not wood.
Bone.
A small piece at first. Then another. And another. The silence that followed felt like an explosion. Neighbors gasped. Officers froze. The quiet detective's hands trembled as she brushed away more soil, exposing the unmistakable pale arcs of a human rib cage wrapped in the tangled roots of the tree. Someone screamed. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone let out a sound that didn't feel human. But the street didn't move. It felt anchored in place by the weight of what they were witnessing, the final resting place of a woman who had vanished without a trace, hidden beneath a tree that had grown tall enough to erase the memory of the shallow grave beneath it. The quiet detective closed her eyes and exhaled the breath she'd been holding for 26 years without even knowing it. "We found her," she said softly. But they hadn't. Not all of her.
Not yet.
They found fragments intertwined with roots, pieces of ribs, a femur cracked by soil pressure, bone shards scattered by decades of tree growth. The forensic team moved like surgeons, their hands calibrated to handle remains that had waited too long to be touched again. Then something unexpected emerged, a metallic glint between two ribs. They uncovered it carefully, revealing a small pendant on a chain. It was tarnished, darkened by time, but Claire's sister collapsed when she saw it. It was Claire's, given by their mother when she graduated college, worn every day, never found during the searches. She had been here all along. Detectives swallowed grief and kept working. As they extracted the bones, more pieces emerged. A button from her dress, a rusted zipper, fragments of fabric matching the floral pattern found in the storm drain. The scene grew heavier. The weight of years pressed into the air until every breath felt like lifting a stone. The quiet detective looked at the man through the patrol car window. He met her gaze, not with defiance, not with remorse, but with something hollow, something broken deep enough to swallow a lifetime. He didn't cry.
He didn't speak.
He simply stared, as if witnessing the final consequence of a choice he made on a night when fear eclipsed humanity. Then one officer called out, voice tight. "There's something else." Buried deeper, almost at the center of the grave, beneath layers of bone and root, lay a small wooden object, rotted but still intact enough to identify. A child's music box, decorated with chipped paint. The crank missing. The lid sealed shut by decay. Claire didn't have children. She didn't own a music box. Not one like this. The detectives exchanged looks. A new question swelled in the silence. What was this? Why was it buried with her? They bagged it, sealed it, and carried it away for testing. The quiet detective watched it disappear into the evidence van, a knot forming in her stomach. The music box didn't fit. It didn't belong. Unless it belonged to someone else. Someone he knew before Claire. Someone missing. Someone the police never connected. A new cold case whispered through the edges of her mind. But she couldn't chase it now. Not yet. They needed to complete the recovery. They removed the remaining bones, placing them in padded containers. They photographed every angle of the grave. They traced root patterns, mapping how the tree had grown around her. The forensic botanist murmured something chilling, that the tree's accelerated growth in its early years might have been fueled by decomposition nutrients. Nature had absorbed her. The tree had thrived on her absence. The quiet detective felt bile rise in her throat. This wasn't just a grave. It was a monument built unintentionally by time. Finally, as the last bones were lifted and the cavity lay exposed like an open wound, the quiet detective stepped back and turned toward him. He looked down at his hands, trembling. She approached the patrol car slowly. He didn't stop her. He didn't turn away. She asked him the question that would define everything. Why here? His voice came out as a whisper, thin as the space between heartbeats. She liked the tree. The quiet detective froze. The entire street froze. He swallowed hard. She planted it. That wasn't true. Claire hadn't planted the tree. He had. But in his fractured memory, in the tangle of obsession and guilt, truth had warped into something unrecognizable. He wasn't hiding her under the tree. He was burying her under the lie he needed to believe. Detectives exchanged grim glances. His mind had rewritten the past so thoroughly that even he no longer recognized where guilt ended and delusion began. They placed him under arrest. He didn't resist, didn't speak, didn't look at the grave one last time. He simply lowered his head and let the officers handcuff him, his wrists closing around 26 years of silence. As they guided him into the squad car, neighbors stared with a mixture of horror and relief. Some cried. Some clung to each other. Some whispered Claire's name like a prayer finally answered. But the quiet detective stood still, hands shaking, staring at the hole beneath the tree. Because something felt wrong. Something felt unfinished. The music box. Its presence echoed in her mind like a low hum. It didn't belong. It didn't connect. It didn't synchronize with the story he told, the story of panic and hiding and moving and burying. The music box suggested something else. Something older. Something he hadn't talked about. Something he couldn't talk about. Or wouldn't. She felt the wind shift, cool brushing across her face, stirring the leaves of the tree above her. She didn't say the thought aloud. Not yet. But she felt it settle into her bones. There's more. And the case wasn't done with them. Not even close. The tree's grave was still open when the whispers began, quiet, uneasy shifts of conversation threading through the street as officers packed their equipment and neighbors retreated behind closed doors. But the quiet detective stayed. She stood at the edge of the hollow earth, arms crossed against the cooling night, staring down at the cavity where roots had coiled themselves around Claire's bones like possessive fingers. The earth beneath her boots felt restless, unsettled, as though the truth buried there was only half dug, only half exhumed. And her mind couldn't let go of the one detail no one else seemed to question. The music box. It wasn't Claire's. It wasn't listed among her belongings. Her family had never seen it. Her students didn't recognize it. And it didn't match anything found in the man's house. A child's music box, painted with fading colors, buried intentionally, sealed away with a dead woman who never owned it. A relic that didn't belong. A symbol of something unspoken. The quiet detective stared at the evidence van as it pulled away, carrying the music box like a secret banging inside a locked chest. Her gut twisted the same way it had the first time she set foot on the case. Something was off. Something didn't fit. And cases that don't fit aren't over. She walked back toward the patrol cars, exhaustion settling into her bones. Officers whispered in tight clusters, discussing the arrest, the remains, the press release that would soon shatter across news feeds. But she didn't hear them. Her thoughts were tangled around that music box, its chipped paint, its sealed lid, its quiet weight. She replayed the moment it was lifted from the grave, wrapped in plastic, and how the man's expression shifted, not with fear, Not with guilt, but with something else entirely. Recognition. He knew it, and he feared it. Detectives brought him into the station. They placed him in an interview room again, hands cuffed loosely, eyes staring at nothing. He didn't look at them, didn't look at the walls, didn't look at the camera blinking red from the corner. His gaze floated somewhere inward, as if sinking through years he'd tried to bury under concrete and dirt and the roots of a growing tree. They placed the music box on the table. He flinched. Not visibly, not dramatically, but his breath hitched just enough for the quiet detective to catch it, a tiny fracture in the wall he'd built around himself. She leaned forward, elbows on the metal table, voice low, steady.
Whose is it?
He didn't answer. She asked again. He closed his eyes. A muscle twitched along his jaw. And slowly, painfully, he whispered, "Not hers." The detectives exchanged glances. They already knew that. What they didn't know was why the music box was buried with Claire, unless he buried more than one secret in that grave. The quiet detective asked the question that seemed to choke the air itself. Then whose is it? He stared at the music box the way a drowning man might stare at the hand reaching down to pull him from the water, not with relief, but with terror. His fingers tightened against the cuffs. His breath grew shallow. The room seemed to shrink around him. He swallowed hard. It's from before. Before Claire. Before 1998. Before the street knew his name. Before he became the quiet neighbor who waved politely and hid his darkness behind trimmed hedges and routine. Detectives waited. He didn't continue. So they pushed. Before what? Before who? Was it from another victim? Another disappearance? A child? A family member? A stranger? A neighbor from a life he had fled? He bowed his head. A man collapsing under the weight of ghosts finally catching up. "I didn't mean for any of it to happen," he whispered. "Not then. Not ever." The quiet detective's voice softened, becoming the calm in a storm that had devoured 2 decades. What happened and when? Silence. Then, "That's not her grave." The words cracked through the room like lightning. Detective stiffened. He continued, voice fractured. "It wasn't meant for her. It wasn't dug for her." The quiet detective stepped closer, heart pounding. If the grave beneath the tree wasn't Claire's originally, then whose was it? And how did Claire end up there? He squeezed his eyes shut. His next words leaked out in fragments. "It was already there. I just used it." Cold washed through the detectives as the implication landed like a blade. The grave under the tree existed before Claire vanished. Before he claimed he panicked. Before he insisted her death was accidental. Someone had been buried there first. Someone else. The quiet detective steadied herself and asked the only question that mattered now. Whose grave was it? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, tears finally broke through. The first they'd seen. Silent, raw, slipping down his face like the grief of a man haunted long before Claire ever met him. The detective stepped outside. The hallway felt too bright, too sterile for the darkness unraveling in the interview room. They needed answers. And answers come from history. They dove into his past. Old records. Old addresses. Old employment forms scribbled in near-illegible handwriting. Places he had lived before Texas. People who had known him. Neighbors long moved away. A landlord who remembered he left suddenly, overnight. A missing person report from another state, filed by a family who claimed their teenage daughter vanished in 1993, last seen walking near the apartment where he once lived. She was 12. Her name was Lily. And she owned a music box, according to her mother's statement. Painted with chipped colors. Found once at a yard sale. A music box that family had begged investigators to mark as important, but it never resurfaced. Never mattered. Never tied to anything.
Until now.
The quiet detective stared at the 1993 file photo of Lily, a small girl with wide eyes and a faint smile, and felt her stomach drop. The music box was hers. It had been buried with Claire because he couldn't face burying it alone. It had followed him through decades of guilt, a relic of the beginning, long before Claire's ending. He hadn't panicked once. He had panicked twice. And the tree's grave belonged to Lily first. Detectives moved fast. They reopened Lily's case. They issued interstate warrants. They brought forensic teams back to the tree. They expanded the search perimeter. They searched deeper, wider, scanning for remnants of a grave dug 5 years before Claire vanished. But tree roots distort memory. Soil shifts. Bones fragment. If Lily's remains existed there once, the earth had devoured them. Still, the music box told the truth. The quiet detective returned to him with Lily's photo. He broke. Not violently. Quietly. Painfully. As if a dam had cracked and the water didn't rush out. It seeped, slow and devastating. "I thought she was asleep," he whispered. "She wasn't supposed to die. She was just hurt. And then she wasn't breathing. And I didn't know what to do. I never know what to do." Detectives pressed. Why did he bury her under the tree? Why did he run? Why did he choose Claire next? He shook his head, sobbing now. "I didn't choose her. She was kind.
She talked to me.
I thought she understood. I thought she could help me forget." The words twisted into something unbearable. He didn't want Claire to replace Lily. He wanted Claire to erase her. And when Claire resisted, rejected, or simply didn't understand the twisted need behind his quiet smiles and harmless offers to fix her fence, the past repeated. The same panic. The same mistake. The same burial. The quiet detective stepped outside, tears burning her eyes. Not for him, not for the choices he made, but for the string of broken lives stretching behind him like shadows cast from an eclipse. Lily.
Claire.
And maybe others. How many? How far back? How many graves disguised as accidents, disappearances, runaway stories? The forensic teams expanded the yard search again. They scanned beneath the fence line, beneath the deck, beneath the flower beds. They found no remains. Only trace soils and disturbances too old to map clearly. But the truth was clear enough. Claire Donnelly was not his first victim. She wasn't even the first buried under that tree. As the night deepened, the quiet detective looked at the dark silhouette of the tree against the sky and felt something nauseating settle inside her. This wasn't just a cold case. This wasn't just a solved mystery. This wasn't closure. This was discovery. And discovery hurts. He had confessed pieces, but not everything. The rest was buried deeper than any grave. The quiet detective stepped back inside the station. He looked at her with hollow eyes. She asked him one question, barely above a whisper. "How many?" He closed his eyes. His mouth trembled. He inhaled. And didn't answer. Not because he refused. Because he didn't know. And outside, the tree swayed gently in the night wind, its branches whispering over the soil that had held decades of silence, now broken open at last. The question hung in the air like a blade suspended over the room. How many? He didn't answer. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply closed his eyes, and the silence that spilled from him was more horrifying than any confession could have been. A silence that suggested there were too many memories to count, too many nights blurred into the same panicked haze, too many forgotten edges of a life twisted long before authorities ever knew his name. Detectives exchanged glances heavy with dread. Not knowing is worse than knowing. Uncertainty stretches the imagination into shapes more monstrous than truth. They could feel the case growing beneath their feet like a sinkhole widening with every breath he refused to take. The quiet detective stepped out of the interrogation room and into the hallway humming with tension. Officers whispered, phones rang, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Yet she felt detached, as if she were moving through the echo of a nightmare rather than the real world. The deeper they dug, the more the case mutated. No longer the tragic disappearance of a teacher, but the unraveling of a man whose past had collapsed into a labyrinth of buried panic, fractured memory, and unspoken horrors. She leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly, and let the facts reorder themselves in her mind.
Claire was gone.
Lily was gone. There were probably others. But the tree had been the center of his world. a living monument to every mistake he tried to hide. He nurtured it, protected it, let it grow over the truth. A ritual disguised as gardening, a grave disguised as a centerpiece. And yet, beneath that tree, they found only fragments, not a complete skeleton, not enough to reconstruct a body. The soil had absorbed too much. The roots had taken more. It raised a chilling possibility. Part of Claire or Lily might still be somewhere else. Somewhere he hadn't mentioned. Somewhere he wouldn't think to mention because his mind had been erasing and rewriting the story for decades. The quiet detective pushed off the wall, steadying herself. There was still one place